Welcome back to the Holy Discussion. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share and hit that bell icon so you won't miss out on any of our future deep dives. We're going to be diving deep today.
Ooh, deep dive.
Into the story of Michael Bernard. He's a man who went from a life of crime to having this incredible spiritual transformation. And
yeah, it's such a fascinating story. And it raises a lot of really interesting questions. Like, can people really change after committing serious crimes? Like, what role does faith play in rehabilitation? And just what are the psychological and spiritual kind of implications of such a profound life change?
yeah, so many layers to unpack here. And, his story really kind of gets to the heart of what it means to find redemption, even when you're going through some really, really dark circumstances.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that stood out to me right away is that Michael grew up in this neighborhood in D.C. called Harmony.
Harmony.
Yeah.
That's ironic.
Ironic, right.
Very ironic.
Because when you think of harmony...
yeah, you think of peace and tranquility. Not exactly what comes to mind when you think about a place that's known for crime and violence and drug activity.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this, I don't know, it makes you think about how much of our path is determined by just like the circumstances we're born into.
It really does. Like, how much of a choice do we really have when our environment is constantly pushing us in a certain direction?
But even within that environment, Michael talks about going to church with his family, although it seems like faith didn't really resonate with him at that point.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like, you can go through all the motions of religion, going to church, doing all the rituals. But does that really mean you've internalized the faith?
I mean, it makes you wonder, right? What does it actually take for faith to become like a lived experience, something that actually shapes our values and guides our actions?
It's a good question. And for Michael, it seems like that turning point came much later. But unfortunately, it was through a very dark event. At just 22 years old, he committed murder. And it's an act that he expresses, even now, really deep remorse for.
Taking a human life it's such a weighty act.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just forces you to confront all these questions about morality and justice. Like, what is the meaning of life? I mean, how do you even begin to process the guilt and shame that comes with something like that?
That's something I don't think any of us can truly understand unless we've been in that situation.
Right.
And he ended up facing a life sentence in prison.
He was only 22.
22 years old. He talks about feeling utterly lost and hopeless, like his life was over.
It got to the point where he was actually planning to commit suicide in his cell.
Yeah. It's hard to even fathom that level of despair,
Right.
When you're facing a life sentence, especially at such a young age, it's understandable how someone could just lose all hope.
Absolutely. And what's incredible is that right when he was about to go through with it, he had this overwhelming feeling that there had to be another way.
It's almost like a glimmer of hope in the darkest of moments.
Yeah. Like right at that point where he was ready to give up, something inside him just shifted.
What do you think caused that shift? I mean, was it a sudden surge of survival instinct or maybe like a subconscious yearning for something more?
Maybe a little bit of both. And, it was right then at that moment of doubt that he describes hearing the voice of God.
The voice of God.
He describes it as this undeniable presence, a voice that brought him an overwhelming sense of peace and joy.
It makes you think about the nature of spiritual experiences. Yeah. Was it an actual audible voice that he heard, or was it more of an intuitive feeling, a profound sense of knowing?
That's a great question. It really makes you wonder how our brains process those kinds of experiences. Like, where does science end and spirituality begin? It's a really fascinating intersection.
It is. And in that moment, Michael felt chosen, wanted, loved. Despite his past, despite everything he'd done. It's such a powerful example of grace, isn't it?
Absolutely. That idea, unconditional love and forgiveness. Like, even our darkest moments, we're still worthy of redemption. But how do you reconcile such a profound experience with the reality of your past actions?
Yeah, how do you move forward carrying the weight of what you've done?
And that's what I found so compelling about his story. He didn't shy away from the guilt and the shame. In fact, he talks about experiencing intense physical pain that he attributes to his past sins.
That's an interesting connection. We know that emotional distress can manifest physically. It's possible his guilt was so deeply ingrained that it was impacting his physical health.
It's like almost like his body was carrying the weight of his past, even as his spirit was seeking redemption.
It really highlights the connection between our mind, body, and spirit. They're not separate entities. They all influence each other.
Right. And he was grappling with this conflict. On one hand, he knew God had forgiven him. But on the other hand, he still felt this overwhelming sense of unworthiness.
That's a struggle that so many people can relate to. We can logically understand the concept of forgiveness, but emotionally, it can be so much harder to actually accept it, especially when we've hurt others.
How do we reconcile those conflicting feelings and truly embrace forgiveness for ourselves and for others? It's a journey, isn't it?
It is. And for Michael, it was a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns. Like when he was offered a plea deal for 20 years, he initially rejected it.
He rejected it?
Yeah. He actually believed that God wanted him to go to trial.
Wow. That suggests a deep level of trust in divine intervention. Like he believed that God would somehow orchestrate a favorable outcome through the trial.
It makes you think about free will versus destiny. Was he putting his fate entirely in God's hands? Or was there still room for his own agency in the process?
It's like walking this tightrope between faith and action. And in Michael's case, it seems like both divine intervention and human agency were at play. His lawyer, who wasn't even a Christian at the time, urged him to take the plea deal. He even pleaded with Michael's parents to try and convince him.
It's interesting that his lawyer, someone outside of his faith community, was so insistent. It's like he sensed the gravity of the situation, the potential risks of going to trial. It speaks to the power of human connection, you know? Sometimes the guidance we need comes from unexpected sources.
And ultimately, Michael did feel this conviction that he should take the deal. He even had a vision of a ram, which he interpreted as a sign from God.
The symbolism of the ram is really powerful, especially in Christianity. It reminds us of the story of Abraham and Isaac, where God provides a ram as a substitute sacrifice. It symbolizes God's willingness to provide for and protect his people.
It definitely adds a layer of complexity to the story. Do you think Michael saw the vision as a sign of God's mercy and intervention in his own life?
It's certainly open to interpretation, but what's remarkable is that even after accepting the plea deal, things took another unexpected turn.
Oh.
I'm hooked now. What happened?
Okay, so get this. Michael's being processed for transfer to a different prison, right? And the officer looking over his paperwork is just like completely baffled by what she sees.
What? What is it? Was there a problem with the plea deal?
Even crazier. She looks at Michael and says, it says here your sentence is only 10 years.
Wait, what? 10 years, not 20.
10 years. He was just as shocked. He even double-checked his own copies of the court documents. Showed them to his case manager at the new prison.
Yeah.
The case manager confirmed it. 10 years.
Yeah.
Officially in the system.
But how? If the plea deal was for 20 years, how could the sentence be 10?
That's the thing. There's no record of any changes being made. No explanation at all.
So the 10-year sentence just magically appeared?
It's like it just came out of thin air. You'd think he'd be ecstatic.
Or of course. I mean, who wouldn't be?
But he wasn't. He was terrified, convinced it was a mistake. Like any minute, they were going to realize the error and tack on those missing 10 years.
Wow. It's like he couldn't allow himself to believe in a positive outcome.
He was so used to expecting the worst.
Yeah.
His past had really taken a toll.
It makes you think about how much our past experiences can affect our ability to experience joy, even when it's staring us right in the face.
Fast forward a few years, and Michael gets a letter from his lawyer. Turns out, his reconsideration hearing, the one his lawyer filed years ago, has been approved.
A reconsideration hearing. Can you remind me what that is?
Basically, it's a chance for the court to take another look at the sentence, Maybe you reduce it based on things like rehabilitation, good behavior, or even new evidence. In Michael's case, his lawyer filed it, hoping to get that 20-year sentence reduced.
So he's going back to court even though his sentence is already mysteriously 10 years. This story just keeps getting wilder.
And all this time, Michael's still wrestling with his past, thinking he hasn't paid enough for what he did. Even with this apparent miracle, he's convinced it can't be real.
He's still trapped by his own guilt, even when the universe seems to be offering him a second chance. It's really quite sad.
So he goes to court for this hearing, and standing there before him is the same judge who sentenced him all those years ago.
No way! Talk about a full circle moment.
The judge even remembers Michael. Says that the things Michael said at his original sentencing, they really stuck with him.
Wow. I bet that was an intense moment for Michael, all those emotions flooding back.
Michael's lawyer then formally requests that the judge reduce his sentence by 10 years.
So basically they're asking for the sentence he already has, the one that just magically appeared.
Yep. And guess what?
The judge went for it.
Without a second thought, the judge grants the request. Officially reduces Michael's sentence to 10 years. And if that wasn't enough, as the judge is finalizing everything, He mentions he has a letter from the prosecutor.
The prosecutor. What would they have to say? Weren't they the ones who were pushing for a harsh sentence in the first place?
Exactly. But this letter, it commends Michael for the incredible changes he's made in his life. Actually recommends leniency in the sentencing.
That's a complete 180. To think that Michael could have such an impact on someone who was once his adversary, it speaks volumes about the power of transformation.
And because of all the time he's already served, plus his good behavior, with this reduced sentence, he's eligible for immediate release. He walks out of prison that day, a free man, after serving 6 years and 8 months of his original 20-year sentence.
Amazing. Talk about a second chance. But what happens next? How does he adjust to life outside prison after all that?
So Michael walks out of prison, a free man, right? Ready for this new life dedicated to God. But I imagine it wasn't all easy from there.
Of course not. Re-entering society after being in prison for years, that's tough for anyone, let alone someone who's gone through such a huge spiritual shift.
He actually talks about how he struggled to find that same level of spiritual intensity that he felt while he was in prison.
Yeah, that makes sense though. Prison's obviously a terrible place, but it also has this strange kind of clarity to it. There aren't really distractions, so you're forced to face these big questions about life and meaning and your purpose.
So then you get out, and the world is just so full of noise and temptations.
It is. And all the things that make life, work and relationships, all that, it can kind of push those spiritual things to the side if you're not careful.
And for Michael, it was a struggle for sure. He got a job at this grocery store, but then they let him go when they found out about his past.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was crushed. Felt like maybe God was testing him, punishing him again.
It's so easy to fall back into those feelings of doubt and despair when things get tough. It makes you question everything you thought you knew.
But what's really powerful is that even with those challenges, those moments of doubt, Michael never gave up on his faith. He refused to believe it was just some kind of prison crutch, something that wouldn't last in the real world.
He held on to that belief even when things are really hard. That's true faith, I think.
And he knew he had to find a way to bring his faith into his everyday life. Make it a part of who he was, not just something he did on Sundays.
Living a spiritual life, it's not just about the rituals and the routines. It's about actually embodying those spiritual principles in every part of your life, your work, your relationships, even just how you spend your free time.
So he started making prayer and reflection a regular part of his day, even found little ways to kind of minister to others. It's like he was rekindling that spiritual fire, but this time it was grounded in the reality of his new life.
That's a good way to put it. It's not about clinging to the past or trying to recreate the way things used to be. It's about finding new ways to connect with your faith that fit who you are now.
And he realized that his connection with God wasn't about how much time he spent praying or reading the Bible. It was about the fact that God was the source of his strength. So he learned to just include God in everything he did, working, spending time with family, even just going for a walk.
It's a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing faith as a list of things you have to do, you start to see it as a constant presence in your life, a guiding force that's always with you.
And it all goes back to that simple phrase, try me. It's this beautiful reminder that God's always there, waiting for us to invite him into our lives, into all those little moments that make up our days.
Whether you're religious or not, it's a powerful message. It's about approaching life with openness, being curious and being willing to see that there's something bigger than ourselves at work in the world.
Michael's story is really incredible. It's about transformation, going from utter despair to this life full of faith and purpose and forgiveness.
It shows us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope for change and growth. And it leaves us with some really important questions.
What's truly mean to try God? How can we find a faith that helps us through all the ups and downs of life? And how can we see those little glimpses of the divine in our own everyday moments? Those are questions that are worth thinking about, questions that can take us on our own spiritual journeys.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for sharing Michael's story with us.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode with anyone who might need to hear Michael's message of hope and redemption. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.